Think back to your earliest memory. It might be a birthday, a room, a face, a feeling you cannot quite name. Hold it for a moment. Now ask yourself, how old were you? For most people, the answer is somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. Almost nothing survives before that. Not the first time you saw your mother's face. Not the first word you heard. Not the first meal, the first laugh, the first morning you opened your eyes to the world. Those years are gone. And here's what makes that strange. They were not empty years. In the first 3 years of your life, you were learning at a speed you will never match again. You were acquiring language. You were learning to walk. You were developing trust, fear, attachment, and curiosity. Your brain was developing at a pace it will never match again, forming connections, building systems, laying down the architecture of an entire human mind. And yet, almost none of it left a memory you can reach. Why? The answer is not what most people assume. It is not that childhood was too distant. It is not that those years were unimportant. And it is not, as was once believed, that the mind buried them on purpose. The answer is something far more interesting and far more human. The brain has a structure called the hippocampus. It sits deep inside the temporal lobe, and its job is essential. It takes what you experience and converts it into memory. Without a functioning hippocampus, experiences do not become stories. They simply pass through and disappear. This is well understood. When the hippocampus is damaged in adults, new memories stop forming entirely. In early childhood, the hippocampus is not damaged, it is simply not finished. The hippocampus is one of the last brain structures to reach maturity. In the first years of life, it does not yet have the architecture to reliably form autobiographical memories, the memories that belong to a self, to a story, to a continuous personal timeline. One of the brain's most important gateways for autobiographical memory was there. It simply was not yet built for the task. That is the first piece of the answer. But it is not the whole answer, because a developing hippocampus alone does not fully explain what happens. There is something else going on, something more active, more surprising. For much of the 20th century, scientists assumed the adult brain could not grow new neurons. That assumption turned out to be wrong. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, research confirmed that the hippocampus is one of the rare regions in the brain where neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, continues throughout life. But in infancy, the rate of neurogenesis in the hippocampus is not slow and steady. It is extraordinarily high. The infant brain is not simply receiving experience, it is simultaneously constructing itself, laying down millions of new neurons, forming new connections, reorganizing its own architecture at a pace that will never be repeated. Researchers Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto proposed something striking. This intense neurogenesis may be part of what erases early memories. As new neurons are born and integrated into existing memory circuits, they disrupt and overwrite the connections that were already there. The brain is not failing to record early experience, it may be actively replacing those early recordings as it builds itself. This hypothesis, now called neurogenesis-induced forgetting, is supported strongly in animal research. In mice, artificially increasing neurogenesis erases recent memories. Suppressing neurogenesis allows memories to survive. The evidence in animals is compelling. In humans, direct confirmation is still being studied. Neurogenesis-induced forgetting in humans remains an active area of research, not a settled conclusion. But as one leading explanation, one that fits the developmental timeline, aligns with the animal evidence, and connects to what we know about hippocampal construction, it offers something rare in science:
a mechanism that makes sense. The brain was not passive in early childhood, it was rebuilding itself, and that rebuilding may have cost us our earliest stories. Here's a question that sounds simple but is not. Who were you at 18 months old? Not what were you doing, not what were you feeling. Who were you? A sense of continuous personal identity, the feeling that you are the same person who woke up yesterday, who will wake up tomorrow, who has a past and will have a future, does not come with birth. It develops. Psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. designed a now famous experiment to study when self-awareness emerges in animals and children. He placed a mark on a child's face without their knowledge, then showed them a mirror. Children under about 18 months do not reach for the mark on their face. They do not yet connect the reflection to themselves. After 18 to 24 months, that changes. The child looks in the mirror, sees the mark, and reaches for their own face. Something has clicked. The mirror test does not capture everything that self-awareness means. Researchers debate its limits, and self-awareness likely develops along multiple dimensions simultaneously. But as a developmental milestone, a measurable signal that something fundamental has shifted, it marks a meaningful threshold. A continuous sense of personal identity is beginning to form. Autobiographical memory, memory that belongs to a self, memory that says, "This happened to me," requires a self to attach to. Before that sense of continuous identity is established, experiences happen, they are felt, they are real, but there is not yet a stable narrative identity to inscribe them onto. The filing system was still being built. The files had nowhere permanent to go. So we have three explanations. The hippocampus was still developing, the brain may have been overwriting its early recordings as it grew, and the autobiographical self was still coming online. Each of these three alone would slow the formation of lasting early memories. Together, they almost guarantee that the first years leave little behind. But here's something even those three explanations don't fully account for. Your earliest memories, the few that survived, may not be entirely your own.
When you remember something, you are not playing back a file. You are rebuilding it. Every time a memory is recalled, the brain reconstructs it from stored fragments. And every time it is reconstructed, it is vulnerable to change. Details shift, emotions intensify or fade. Context rewrites meaning. This is not a flaw in human memory. It is how human memory works. Memory is not a recording. Memory is a construction. And in early childhood, the construction of memory is especially dependent on something outside the child's own mind: language. Autobiographical memory and language are developmentally linked. Research by Catherine Nelson and Robin Fivish demonstrated that children's ability to form and retain personal memories is tied directly to their ability to narrate experience. Before children can place events into language, before they can say, "This happened, then this, then that," those events do not consolidate into retrievable stories in the same way. Language gives memory its structure. And there is a further dimension to this. The adults in a child's early life do not simply witness the child's experience. In a real sense, they help author it. When a parent narrates a child's day, "You were scared of the dog and then it licked your hand and then you laughed," they are not just describing what happened, they are helping the child organize experience into narrative, into story, into memory. Research shows that parents who engage in elaborative reminiscing, asking detailed questions, adding context, building stories around shared events, raise children who form earlier and more detailed autobiographical memories. Storytelling practices, it turns out, shape what survives,
not by inventing memories, but by providing the narrative scaffolding that allows real experiences to consolidate into lasting form. Your earliest memories may be partly the experiences you had, and partly the stories that the people around you helped build around those experiences. Stop for a moment and consider what that means. The memory you think of as your oldest, the one that feels most like the beginning of you, may not be a recording of something that happened. It may be a story that was told to you so many times and so early that it became indistinguishable from your own experience. Not a fabrication, not a lie, something more interesting than either of those. A memory that began outside your mind, was given to you by someone who loved you and over time became genuinely yours. We tend to think of memory as the most private, most personal thing we possess, the most direct evidence of who we are. But even our earliest memories, the ones closest to the beginning of ourselves, were partly constructed by other people. We did not just inherit genes from the people who raised us. We inherited pieces of our own past. If memory were purely biological, it would work roughly the same way in every human being on Earth. But it does not. Psychologist Chi Wong at Cornell University conducted cross-cultural research comparing the earliest childhood memories of people from different backgrounds. She found that Maori adults in New Zealand, raised in a culture with a deep tradition of communal storytelling and the practice of passing oral history through generations, tend to report earliest memories from approximately 2.5 years of age. Western adults typically report memories from closer to 3 to 3.5 years, a gap of roughly 6 months to a year. This does not mean that culture creates memories where none existed. The biology of memory development remains real. The hippocampus still matures, the self still develops. But the cultural environment, the degree to which storytelling is practiced, the age at which children are invited into communal narratives, the value placed on remembering and retelling personal experience, appears to influence how early the autobiographical memory system begins producing memories that survive into adulthood. Memory is partly biological inheritance and partly cultural inheritance. The brain provides the architecture. The community provides part of the language it is built in. So consider what we now know. The hippocampus was not ready. The brain may have been overwriting itself as it grew. The autobiographical self was still forming. Language, the structure memory depends on, was still being built. And the stories that survived were partly shaped by the people around you. 5 separate forces, all converging at once, all pointing in the same direction. That is not bad luck. That is a system working exactly as it was designed to. Which means childhood amnesia is not the mystery. The mystery is something else entirely. If those years left almost no memory, what did they leave?
Childhood amnesia is not damage. It is not a disorder. It is not a sign that something went wrong. It is a predictable consequence of what was going right. Your earliest self was extraordinarily alive, experiencing, learning, attaching, forming. What did not exist yet was the full system needed to translate those experiences into the kind of autobiographical memories you carry today. The absence of memory does not mean the absence of effect. Research consistently shows that early childhood experience, the quality of attachment, the patterns of care, the emotional environment of those first years shapes the developing brain in ways that influence behavior, emotional regulation, and social patterns throughout life. Not as a permanent destiny, not as fixed fate, but as a set of early patterns, emotional templates, relational habits, the nervous system's early baseline settings that were laid down during those silent years and that continue to interact with every experience that follows. Those early patterns are not fixed programming. They are starting conditions, shaped and reshaped by relationships, by environment, by everything that comes after. But they are real, and they began before you had words for any of them. Those years are not missing from your life. They are simply missing from your story. The attachment you formed in those years, or struggled to form, contributed to how you learned to reach for others. The emotional environment you were held in helped set the nervous system's early responses to uncertainty. The quality of care you received was part of the foundation your brain built itself around. A foundation that later experience continues to build upon. You cannot remember any of it, but it is there. We spend our lives trying to understand ourselves. We look back through our memories. We trace the moments we can name. We search for the events that made us who we are. And we almost never reach the years that mattered most. Not because they were lost, but because the brain that would have stored them was still becoming the brain that could. There is a version of you that existed before memory, that was held and frightened and curious and loved. That version of you did not disappear. It became the foundation that every memory since has been built on top of. The years are not missing from your life. They are missing from your story. Everything you are was built in that silence. If you liked this, subscribe now for brand new videos every single week.